For me, it was always about the music. Uprising, this an uprising. There ain't no work and we have no shilling. We can't take no more of this suffering. So we riot in a Brixton.
We are the small axe, sharpened to cut you down.
So, Alex Wheatle, thank you so much for coming onto the platform. You are an award-winning novelist. You've won several awards. You won an MBE from the Queen in 2008 for your services to literature. And your story was adapted for the BBC Small Axe episode that was also named after you. So please tell us about your early life and growing up in the Shirley Oaks children's home.
My early life, Micah, was quite a traumatic one for family reasons that my mother couldn't look after me. My father tried, but he couldn't look after me either. And so I was placed into care when I was around about 2 years of age. And at 3 years of age, I was taken into the Shirley Oaks Children's Home, which is about 3 to 4 miles east of Croydon on the Kent-Surrey border. And it's like a children's home village. You had about 60, 70 cottages there where children like myself, who for one reason or another found themselves in care. And this was quite a brutal place. And even though I was physically abused and sexually abused, I think the most lingering trauma that I had was the emotion of loneliness, because I did not have any family visiting me. I felt very much alone for many, many years, until I eventually traced my parents in my mid-20s. So a very traumatic time for me. And then I left Shirley Oaks when I was around about 15, and I entered a hostel in Brixton, just off Brixton Hill. And there I learned about my identity, which was fantastic for me because I didn't know quite who I was. And so being in Brixton helped me identify myself. And at last I felt like I belonged.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And following on from that, you were involved in the 1981 Brixton riots. And during that time, there were issues around unemployment and attacks from the far right, and particularly stop and search. So how did these factors influence your decision to get involved in the Brixton riots? And what outcomes did you hope to achieve?
Well, being in Brixton, it kind of, if you're a young black guy like I was, it immediately politicizes you because you see the oppression from the police, and you believe that you're not wanted there, or even though many of us were born there, it seems like they wanted to purge the streets of us. So that politicizes you immediately. It puts you on like a high alert. And when I see the way we was being treated, I mean, on my first occasion in a Brixton police cell, the guy in the neighboring cell, he was being brutalized by about 7 or 8 police officers. And I must have been about 16 years of age when that occurred. So, that kind of makes you realize sometimes it's a fight for your life, all because of the color of your skin. And so that made me very politically aware. And so I was kind of drawn towards reggae music, where our voices were heard, where I could relate and engage with the song lyrics, where I could, engage with that struggle, if you like, and not just in South London, Brixton, but through reggae music on album covers. I would learn about Black people's experiences in South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, all these places where people were trying to fight for equality. So that's what being in Brixton did for me. It just made me politically aware of who I was in the struggle.
And just quickly, you said some really interesting things about the police then. I was reading some of the fantastic articles you've written, and one of them you wrote for the Daily Mirror, talked particularly about a lot of issues to do with race relations, including the Cell report.
Oh, that was the Tony Sewell report that I believe was released, was it last year, I believe? which many black commentators were disgusted about, because he seems to accept that there is no more institutional racism. But I still see it up to this day. Just last year, a black athlete was stopped in her car with her partner. She was taken out, manhandled, treated very roughly, whilst her infant was in the back seat of the car, obviously distressed. These things don't happen to white people. They just don't. So why does it keep happening to us? And they keep telling us that there's no institutional racism. It still has to be addressed. It's still there, whether people deny it or not. And so when I see it, if I experience it, I'm going to voice it because it needs to. Because otherwise, if we keep quiet about it, nothing will get addressed. So we have to be strong and we have to speak our truth. So the police, they have changed somewhat since 1981. I mean, at least now they have to address this race issue. They cannot just arrest us randomly as they did before. They've got to have some kind of intelligence or some kind of method to their operations. 1981 was ridiculous. I was stopped 3 to 4 times in one day. The last occasion when I was just peering into a jeweler's window, and I was deemed to be a threat, but basically I was only a threat because of the color of my skin. Because again, if I was a white person looking into that jeweler's mirror, they would have been left alone. And so these disparities keep occurring. So we need to be strong and speak our truth. So the police got still a long way to go, I feel. They've gone some way, but they need to go further.
Thank you so much for that. That was really, really powerful. While serving your sentence after the Brixton riots, you read authors such as Chester Chimes, Richard Wright, and C.L.R. James. How did these authors influence your decision to become a novelist?
Well, before I picked up any of these great writers' books and texts, I never imagined that Black people were written about and that they were dramatized. That wasn't in my upbringing. I mean, where I grew up, it was just basically white fairy tale stories, Hans Christian Andersen, when I was very, very small. And it's only when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I believe it was, when I first read Huckleberry Finn. And then there was Jim, who escaped with Huckleberry Finn along the Mississippi River. And so I clung on to him for quite a long period of time. But I really felt that growing up, generally, Black people or our experiences weren't referred to. And so when I entered prison and somebody handed me Chester Himes, The Black Jacobins, and Richard Wright, all these narratives, most of them came from North America. I was like, wow, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And many of those characters I could relate to and engage with, and I could feel their pain and I could feel their struggles. So again, it made me feel a bit of belonging that I'd never had before. And so it really improved the awareness of myself, of my identity, and made me engage with my Black history.
Thank you so much for that. And what's powerful about your story is some of your early books were influenced by your experiences in social care. So how did you overcome what you faced there to become the novelist you are today?
Well, Micah, I guess what I did, I needed to express what I felt inside. I mean, I was traumatized. And when I was a young man, when I was a teenager, say 15, 16, 17, I wasn't even aware that I was traumatized. And that would come out in angry bursts and me being sometimes obnoxious with people, sometimes with my friends. Sometimes I would not want to speak to anybody. But really, I was just trying to process what had happened to me in a children's home. And so the form of writing, it took, at first, it was writing lyrics because I was in Brixton. And so there were many sound systems and musical outlets where you could express yourself lyrically. And so I took the opportunity and I felt that was very good for my soul. At last, I was able to vent out all the rage that was building up inside of me for many years. And so that was an escape, if you like. letting this out of my system. And so after a while, it stopped becoming personal, and I started to think maybe I could write about the characters that I came across in Brixton, of maybe other people who had the same or similar experiences to mine growing up in care. And I always felt that people like myself and my friends, we deserved a voice and we deserved a place at the fiction table. We should not be left out, because my mentor, Simeon, in prison, he told me that our story is as valuable as anyone else's. And so I took that as a mantra. I really did. And I still believe that to this day is one of the main motivations why I write, because my narrative, the narrative that's been handed down to me from my parents and their grandparents and so on, is just as important as anybody else's. Beaten with wooden hairbrushes, belts, pots, pans, anything this staff member could lay their hands on. And it was just a life of misery.
And then when he was 7, he says he was sexually abused too.
One of these people in the medical profession, they asked me to undress totally, pants, everything, and then I was assaulted. And well, in my mind, I wasn't even aware that I was assaulted, because when you're 7 years old, you cannot comprehend that. You just think, this is an adult, they must know what they're doing. I remember freezing, like being all rigid and what's going on, and so that nightmare played in my mind for years and years and years.
He didn't tell anyone for almost 3 decades, eventually going to the police.
The sad thing is that the CPS, even though they had numerous witnesses, my peers, they decided that it wasn't in the public interest. And I felt, what about my interest? What about the interests of me and the people I grew up with? What about my interest? And that burned me, that really burned me over the years.
Alex Wheatle was just one of many children who'd grown up in care homes run by Lambeth Council who claimed they'd been abused. 3 inquiries were launched in the late 90s, 3 perpetrators convicted and jailed, but many others identified who escaped investigation. No one in the council lost their jobs or were moved. Lambeth is now one of many institutions which will be scrutinised in the government's child abuse inquiry, an inquiry Alex Wheatle has little faith in.
All I'm seeing is people in nice suits and expensive heels telling us, standing up in nice podiums and saying that they really care. I hear it all the time, I heard it all my life. We really care. But from my observation, no, they don't. Because why? I suffered 40 years ago, over 40 years ago. And yet these cases are still coming out.
Alex left Shirley Oaks when he was just 15 and drifted into trouble. He spent a short spell in prison after the Brixton riots. Life, he says, has been a constant struggle. And how have you survived?
Oh, I'm not sure. That's the honest answer to that. I'm really not. I mean, I've been fortunate. I managed to find my family. I have incredible friends, but for so many others, it's been a tragedy. Some people that I know are unable to look after their own families. Some people cannot form relationships. And the list goes on and on and on. So this is why this is so important. I've had friends of mine who took their own lives because of what happened in care.
Becoming a successful writer has helped heal some of the pain of the past. An MBE from the Queen accepted, he says, on behalf of all the children, betrayed by a system supposed to care for them.
It was like a stamp of approval that, hey, they're finally acknowledging me, someone like me. And hopefully, through this, they can acknowledge all the others, MBE or no MBE. They can acknowledge all the others who have suffered so greatly, who are still suffering in pain.
After decades of keeping silent, Alex Wheatle says he'll stay quiet no longer. With other survivors of abuse, they'll keep telling their stories until they get an inquiry they can trust, which will finally listen to what they have to say.
Thank you. And yeah, you wrote 2 really fantastic books, so Crongton and Cane Warriors. So please just tell us about those books. And as we approach Black History Month, please just explain to parents, to teachers, because your book, Crongton won a Guardian Children Writers Award, and your book, Cane Warriors, is the Amazon Teacher's Pick for years 1 to 9. So please just...
Yes. That's fantastic. Sorry. Yeah, Crongton Lights, that came about. I remember as a kid, I would like those Adventist stories about King Arthur going off to try and find the Holy Grail. And so really, Crongton Lights is a modernized version of that kind of narrative, where we have a group of teenagers and they have to leave their recognizable place of home and travel somewhere far to retrieve something that is very special to them. And in this case, it's a phone. It's a mobile phone. And we know how precious phones are to young people these days. And so their friends, they learn about themselves. They learn about their fears, their aspirations, and who they are. And they have to go on this mission to try to retrieve this girl's phone, and they come across all kinds of dangers. They really do. And then they've got to get back home through those dangers. So it's like, it's very perilous. There's lots of jeopardy in there, and hopefully lots of fun too that young readers can enjoy. Cane Warriors, that came about because of a family connection, namely my mother. I went to visit her because we had been reunited some years ago. And I'm a storyteller, so I'm very eager to learn about her childhood. How did she grow up in Jamaica? And so we had long conversations about these issues and themes. And one day she told me that when she was a young girl, she used to hear whispers of this legendary character called Chief Tacky. And I wondered who this was. And I remember I went through my Bob Marley collection and I couldn't find his name being mentioned there. So I did a quick Google search and I understood and was fascinated to learn that Chief Tacky, he led the famous slave revolt in 1760 in the parish of St. Mary in Jamaica. And it as happens that my mother, where she lived in St. Mary, was very adjacent to where the revolt took place all those years ago. And so, Micah, I felt I was writing family history. And at times when I did the research, I had to weep because the details were so traumatic. And, you know, the saying in the book is the blood remembers. And with me, it definitely did, because it brought me to tears so many times as I was going through this narrative. And so for me, again, the story of Tacky and his fellow Cane Warriors is just as important as anybody else's narrative of any hero around the world. I mean, if you go to Greece, then you've got the 500, haven't you? The 500s, or is it the 300 Spartans? You know, and their story has been around for thousands of years, and rightly so. Greeks and many people, they view those people as heroes. And so I believe we need to do more of that with our stories, and we need to maintain our heroes, and they need to speak to the world too. People need to be aware of our history and our heroes. And, you know, I'm humbled to write about them.
Yeah, thank you so much. And following on from that, there are so many young people, young Black writers that are up and coming that will use you as an inspiration for what you've achieved. So what advice would you give to young Black novelists that want to tell stories in similar to the way that you have?
The first tip I would give to any aspiring Black writer, or any other writer for that matter, is to find a theme, find a subject matter that compels you, that fascinates you, that interests you. That is the first tip, because when you find something that you feel passionately about, you cannot help but do the research. You cannot help but, you know, ensure that you're going to serve this theme properly, and you're going to give it a right professional attention. And you're not going to wake up 3 or 4 weeks down the line and suddenly get bored of it, because it is your passion. And so you are going to sit down and take it through to the end of the journey. And so that's the first tip. Find something that you're passionate about and write about it.
Thank you. And even following on from that, your story was told in BBC Small Acts, and it was powerful, it was moving, it was everything that it should be. Please just tell us about how that came about. So for Steve McQueen to tell your story.
It was by chance, I believe, because I was part of the writing team, the creative team. Steve McQueen had created a writer's room, and there was about 6 or 7 writers in this writer's room to help develop the series, to discuss themes that should be in the series. And one morning, Steve came to work and he said he really wants us to concentrate on a story that tells the story of a young black man who's had experience of institutions like children's home or prisons or young people's offenders units. And one of my fellow writers, Alistair Siddons, he pointed at me, he said, "Alex, that is you." And so for the rest of that day, Steve, I related my story to Steve and the rest of the writer's room. And Steve, at the end of it, he said, "Right, that is it. That is what we are going to do." And so that is how it came about. And I remember visiting the set on a few occasions and feeling this sense of overwhelmingness. It's just incredible to see young actors, especially the young man who played me, Shay Cole, be in the space where I was, because they had beautifully recreated my bedroom from my hostel, even with the detail of paintings propping up my mattress. They even had that detail, and the flyers on the walls, the posters, the cigarette papers, the ashtrays. It was so beautifully done. And it just transported me right back to the late 1970s, early 1980s. And I feel very proud, Micah, very proud, because how many writers can claim that their life story has been told and filmed by one of the best directors in the world?
Yeah, and it really was an amazing episode. And following on from that, we are approaching Black History Month, and there are lots of young people that might not be able to find books that tell them about their history, tell them about who they are. So what would you represent? What would you recommend? Sorry, not represent. What would you recommend young people read during this time?
What would I recommend? We're quite fortunate today that there's so many more books available to young Black people now than there was when I was a young man, or 17, 18 years of age. Benjamin Zephaniah, he wrote a very interesting book that was published, I think it was earlier this year, called Windrush Boy. That was that caught my attention. And again, it tells the story of a young boy coming with his family with the Windrush generation and trying to settle here, and he found it difficult and so on. So that's one book I would definitely recommend. Anything by the writer Katherine Johnson. She is like me in terms that she likes to write about Black history and likes to have Black characters in those narratives. So anything by Katherine Johnson. There's so many. Patrice Lawrence, she's one of my favorite authors as well. So there's so many out there now, so many more than there was before. And of course, Malorie Blackman, she is the godmother of Black children's writing in the UK. So anything that she has written, I would urge you to seek out and ask your librarian if there is no copies in that space, and make sure you get to read Malorie Blackman.
Thank you so much for all of those really good recommendations. Even following on just from that, you won an MBE in 2008 from the Queen for your services to literature. What advice would you give to a young person that wants to make a difference, whether it be through writing, through the arts, through whatever, to make a difference for their community?
I think that the one word I would say to any young person is persevere. And try not to be knocked off course. It's so easy. It's so easy these days, if you want to achieve something and you're listening to the advice from friends and family and so on, and they might want to maybe go down a particular road that you're not interested in. So try and stand firm with your interests and what compels and fascinates you, whatever it may be. It might be writing, it might be mathematics, it might be going into the health service as a doctor or a nurse. Anything that you feel that you're compelled to do, try to keep that course and don't let anybody knock you off it, because that is your gift. That is your gift to the world. You know, what you're good at, because everybody is good at something. And so the journey of life is sometimes trying to find out what it is that you excel at. And so once you find it, stick to it, because that is your gift.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And, you know, throughout your life, you've influenced so many different aspects of British society. So what advice would you give to local authorities and organizations that want to facilitate conversations around race, but they're not sure where to start, especially off the back of things like Black Lives Matter, the murder of George Floyd? It's not always easy for local authorities and government organizations to address things such as racism and race. So what advice would you give to such organizations?
Well, Micah, I'm a writer, so you probably won't be surprised at this answer, but I would suggest start in libraries and encourage book clubs, and also make sure that your stock, whatever you have in a library, represents everybody in your community. You know, in Brixton, there's no longer just a Jamaican community or West Indian or whatever. We have communities there from all over the world. You know, so try and serve that. So it's all about engaging the community with the stories that you have in your spaces. So that is what I would do first. If I was in charge of Lambeth Council right now, I would I'll go to every library and maybe do an audit of how does it serve the community, and what could we do to use the library as a hub for meeting places. Because sometimes we forget that libraries are the only places where you can go to in a major city without paying any pounds, without paying any money. And so I would use libraries a lot more than they are used now, and use them as hubs of meeting places, the old and the young and anything in between, to get to know each other, to really, you know, regain that community spirit.
Thank you so much. That was really, really sound, because Nelson Mandela even talked about how education is a tool that can be used to change the world. So that was really, really insightful. So another one of the questions I'd like to ask you is, what are the 3 greatest lessons you've learned over the course of your life?
The 3 greatest lessons. Wow, that's a big question. The first one is perseverance. I guess the second one is that believe in yourself, believe that you are as valuable as anyone else. In fact, I would probably put that number 1. So can I swap them two? Number 1 is believe that you, any individual, is just as important as anyone else. Number 2, persevere. Number 3, find what you are good at. Find out what you are good at.
Thank you so much. 3 really good pieces of advice. And the final question I'd like to ask you is, are you working on any new books or plays or future projects? Could you tell us about them? Maybe just, yeah.
Yes, I am. I'm working on, this time it's a female heroine. Her name is Kamosha, and the title is Kamosha of the Caribbean. And this book is based in 1668. It's based around Port Royal, which is the infamous pirate port in Jamaica, just off Kingston. And Kamosha, she learns how to wield a sword, and she gets to sail the seas with Captain Morgan and goes off on adventures. So look out for that in early 2022.
Thank you so much for that, Alex. And thank you for such a great interview. And I look forward to just seeing all of the projects you're going to be working on in the future.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. To emerge. This is a mark of gentrification as I see it, and very sad really, because these were good schools. I remember 30 years ago, many of these properties were needed renovation, needed work. There was quite a number of squats here, broken down houses. But now, as you can see, they're all been renovated. Now these houses probably go for something like £400,000, I would have thought. Many young people have just been denied the opportunity to live in the area where they were raised, and that's a crying shame. This unit here used to be a buzzing record shop called Safana B, and many young reggae heads like me would pack into it and buy up reggae releases for the weekend. In those days, we must have had about 6-7 record shops, reggae record shops in the Brixton area. But now, it's all changed. Where before you could only maybe buy West Indian food produce, now you can buy food produce from all over the world. This unit here used to sell West Indian bread, bun and cheese, you can get your fish fritters. And now this unit that sells burritos, tortas, burger wings. If you're on minimum wage and you're looking for somewhere to have your lunch and you're faced with a lunch that costs about £6-7, who do these shops really cater for? Those unique units that used to sell to the people who used to live around here. In some ways, they're being forced out.
Last couple of years, more restaurants, coffee shops are coming, and more retail shops are closing down. Used to be very busy on Friday, Saturday, but now like on normal days. Because now if you see this in a weekend, if you come in like Saturday or Friday, your whole food customer, whole block area.
People like me have seen a lot of changes. There's no way about that. And I must say, as much as things are not 100% perfect, it's a lot better than when I came here.
The new have kind of swept away the old, and I like to see the old when I used to walk in Brixton Market many years ago. But I guess you cannot stop progress.
The market that we're in now, I mean, as you probably know about, even 3 or 4 years ago, it was completely empty, completely deserted. And now it feels a bit like Islington, to be honest, or Borough Market. When I first moved to Brixton, I was, in my 20s, and so then what attracted me was that it was sort of young and, vibrant and I suppose a bit edgy. And now I'm in my 40s, and sort of what I like now is that it's become a bit more sedate and, middle class. So, I mean, in a way, sort of Brixton's become, it's sort of changed with me.
I have to admit, it's nice to see a variety of people enjoying Brixton as I never thought imaginable when I was 17, 18, walking through these same alleyways and byways. Because Brixton was a feared place to be, wasn't it? Oh, don't go to Brixton, people would say. But now, as we can say, it's very pleasant. What I do miss is that constant pounding of reggae. I really miss that.